Right now, as Antarctica melts, we have maybe 20 years before the evidence is destroyed forever. And what we're finding beneath the ice isn't what anyone expected. Ancient maps that shouldn't exist, forests that grew where only ice should be, and a window in time when the world beneath the ice was not empty. There's a story nobody tells you about Antarctica, not the one about penguins or research stations or climate change. This is about the people who were there before the ice, before the freeze, before their entire world was erased from history. I'm talking about a civilization that had maybe 50 years to watch everything they built disappear under ice. A grandmother who remembered summer, children who never would. And the maps they left behind, desperately trying to tell us something we refuse to hear. What you're about to see will change how you think about human history, because the clock is ticking, and we're running out of time. Let me ask you something. What if everything we've been told about Antarctica is wrong? Not wrong in a small way. Wrong in a way that rewrites human history. Wrong in a way that means an entire advanced civilization existed and vanished, and we never knew. Here's what they teach us. Antarctica has been frozen solid for 15 million years. That's what's in the textbooks. That's what scientists say. 15 million years of ice, which means no humans, no civilization, no possibility of anything being there except ice and rock and cold. But here's the thing, that's not what the evidence shows. Not even close. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theories or wild speculation. I'm talking about peer-reviewed research, published studies, government surveys, geological data, the kind of stuff that scientists bet their careers on. The kind of evidence that gets buried in academic journals where nobody reads it because it's too complicated and doesn't fit the narrative. So let me lay this out for you. Let me show you what they found. And by the end of this, you're going to see Antarctica in a completely different way. You're going to see human history in a completely different way. And you might start wondering what else we've gotten wrong. We're going to start with something that'll blow your mind. Ancient maps. Maps created hundreds of years ago that show Antarctica without ice. Maps that show coastlines, mountains, rivers. Details that match what's beneath the ice right now. Details that nobody should have known about. The most famous one is the Piri Reis map from 1513. Turkish admiral guy named Piri Reis creates this map on gazelle skin. And at the bottom of this map there's a landmass. A very detailed landmass, with coastlines that curve and bend in specific ways, with geographical features that match Antarctica. Not the Antarctica we see today covered in ice. The Antarctica beneath the ice. The bedrock, the actual land. Now here's where it gets crazy. This map was created in 1513. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. That's 300 years later. So how does a map from 1513 show a place that wasn't discovered for another 3 centuries? But wait, it gets weirder. In 1960, the United States Air Force looked at this map. The 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron. These are not random people. These are military cartography experts. They compared the Piri Reis map to their own seismic surveys of Antarctica. Surveys they did in 1949 using ground-penetrating technology to map what's beneath the ice. And you know what they found? The map matched. Not kind of matched. Not roughly matched. Remarkably matched. Those are their words. The coastline on a map from 1513 matched the bedrock topography beneath 2 miles of ice that we only discovered with modern technology in 1949. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Ohlmeyer wrote a report about this. You can still find it. He said the geographical detail in the lower part of the Piri Reis map agreed remarkably with the seismic profile results, which means whoever made the source maps that Piri Reis copied from had surveyed Antarctica when it wasn't covered in ice, or they had technology we can't explain. And Piri Reis wasn't making this up. He wrote notes on the map. He said he used 20 different source maps, 8 Ptolemaic maps from ancient times, a map from Christopher Columbus, and others. He was compiling older knowledge. He was copying from maps that already existed, maps that were ancient even to him. Now skeptics will tell you the Antarctic part is actually South America distorted to fit the parchment. They'll say it's just a coincidence, but here's the problem with that. The map shows specific features. Princess Martha Coast, Queen Maud Land, the Palmer Peninsula. These are real places in Antarctica, and they're in the right positions, the right orientations, the right relationships to each other. If this was just South America drawn wrong, why does it match Antarctica so perfectly? Why does it match the bedrock beneath the ice so precisely? But the Piri Reis map isn't the only one. There's the Orontius Phineus map from 1531. French mathematician creates a map showing Antarctica as a complete landmass centered on the South Pole, shows it detached from South America, which is correct, shows the Ross Sea, the Weddell Sea, mountain ranges, rivers, 58 specific geographical features that match real Antarctic formations. To make this map work, cartographers have to rotate it 20 degrees and shift the South Pole by about 1,600 kilometers. But when you do that, it matches. The embayments line up. The mountain positions are right. The Ross Sea is there, exactly where it should be, during a time when that ice shelf had melted away. And then there's the Philippe Buech map from 1739. This one's wild. It shows Antarctica as two separate islands divided by a channel of water, a frozen sea running right through the middle of the continent. We didn't know Antarctica was actually two landmasses until the 1950s when we used seismic technology to map beneath the ice. Beneath the ice, Antarctica is indeed divided. A significant portion lies below sea level. If you remove the ice, you'd have two islands separated by water, exactly like the Buech map shows. Buech himself wrote that he was depicting a conjectured geography based on iceberg patterns reported by explorers, but his conjecture just happened to match reality beneath miles of ice. Reality we didn't discover for another 200 years. So we have three maps, created centuries apart, by different people in different countries, all showing the same thing, an ice-free Antarctica with accurate geographical detail that matches modern surveys of the subglacial bedrock. This opens a massive question: who mapped Antarctica before the ice, and when? Now I'm going to tell you something that'll make all of this make sense. Something that's been hidden in glaciology research for years. Something that changes everything. Antarctica wasn't always frozen. I don't mean millions of years ago. I mean recently, geologically recently, human history recently. During the middle of the Holocene period, between about 6,000 and 1,700 years ago, Antarctica experienced something called the Mid-Holocene retreat. The West Antarctic ice sheet collapsed. Not a little bit. It collapsed dramatically. The grounding lines, where the ice meets the ocean floor, retreated at least 250 kilometers inland from where they are today. Let me put that in perspective. 250 kilometers is the distance from New York City to Washington, D.C. That's how much ice pulled back. That's how much land was exposed. Land that had been buried under ice for tens of thousands of years suddenly became accessible again. The ice sheet thinned by 35 meters or more in some places. That's about 12 stories of ice just gone. The rate of thinning was 0.27 meters per year during the peak melt period between 8,000 and 6,000 years ago. That's almost a foot per year. You could watch it melt. You could see the land emerging. This wasn't some minor fluctuation. This was a catastrophic ice sheet collapse, driven by warming ocean waters, reduced ice shelf buttressing, and increased geothermal heat from below. The kind of conditions that create habitable coastlines, that create ice-free zones, that create places where people could live. And we know this happened because of the geological evidence. Sediment cores from the Ross Sea, ice cores from the Allen Hills, marine records showing warm water incursions, chemical signatures showing massive ice sheet retreat. This isn't speculation. This is measured data from dozens of research stations. The Antarctic climate optimum occurred during this same period, between about 11,000 and 9,000 years ago, with secondary warm peaks between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago. Summer temperatures in West Antarctica reached their maximum 4,100 years ago, warmer than today, warmer than at any point in recent history. What does that mean? It means for thousands of years parts of Antarctica were habitable, not comfortable, not tropical, but habitable. Coastal zones where temperatures stayed above freezing during summer months, where you could fish, where you could hunt seals and whales, where you could build settlements along ice-free coastlines. And then 1,700 years ago it ended. The ocean currents shifted, cold water returned, the ice shelves re-advanced, the glaciers surged forward, and in a period of maybe 50 to 100 years, everything that had been exposed was covered again, buried under fresh glacial ice, sealed away like a tomb. If there was a civilization living on the Antarctic coast during that warm period, they would have watched their world end, slowly at first, then faster, then unstoppable, the summers getting colder, the winters longer, the ice creeping closer every year, until there was nowhere left to go. Imagine being that grandmother, the one who remembered when the ocean was open water, when you could walk along the coast without ice, when the sun felt warm on your face during summer, when your people fished and hunted and thrived. And now you're telling stories to your grandchildren about a time they'll never see, about a world that's disappearing, about warmth they'll never feel again. That's not a metaphor. That's what the geological data suggests happened. A human lifetime, maybe two. That's how long they had to watch their civilization freeze over and disappear. But here's where it gets really interesting. The ice that covered those settlements, it preserved them perfectly. See, we know ice can preserve things for thousands of years. We've found mammoths in Siberian ice, still frozen with intact tissue. We've found ancient humans in glaciers, their clothes and tools perfectly preserved. Ice is one of the best preservation environments on Earth, if it's stable, if it doesn't move. And parts of Antarctica have stable ice, ice that doesn't flow, ice that sits in place like a freezer, keeping whatever's beneath it in a state of suspended animation. We've already found evidence of this preservation. Researchers using ground-penetrating radar have mapped the subglacial landscape beneath West Antarctica. They found preglacial erosion surfaces, smooth, gently sloping geological features that indicate long periods without ice cover, features that formed over millions of years but were then rapidly buried when the ice returned. They found paleo-drainage systems, ancient river channels some hundreds of kilometers long carved into the bedrock, rivers that flowed when Antarctica was warm, rivers that would have supported ecosystems, rivers where people could have settled. They found magnetic anomalies, over 400 steep gradient magnetic signatures beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, amplitudes exceeding 1,000 nanoteslas. These aren't random. These correlate directly with bedrock topography. They indicate preserved subsurface features, fault systems, crustal structures, geological formations that have remained intact beneath the ice. Here's what that means. If natural geological features can be preserved in such detail beneath kilometers of ice, then artificial structures would be preserved too. Buildings, stoneworks, tools, artifacts, anything made of durable materials would still be there, frozen in time, waiting to be discovered. And there's more. In the glaciamarine sediments of the Ross Sea and Weddell Sea, researchers found something strange. Micron to millimeter-sized silica-rich spherules, little glass beads formed by cyclical chemical precipitation when silica-rich freshwater mixed with seawater during massive ice melting events. These spherules are markers. They tell us when enormous amounts of freshwater were discharged into the Antarctic Ocean, when the interior of the continent was melting rapidly, when meltwater rivers were flowing under the ice, carving channels, creating temporary lakes, potentially exposing land. The presence of these spherules in late Pleistocene and Holocene sediments means the ice was unstable. It was melting. It was creating conditions where subglacial environments could exist, environments that might have been accessible, environments where evidence of human activity could have been deposited and then refrozen as the ice returned. Now let's talk about something that completely destroys the idea that Antarctica has been a lifeless frozen wasteland for millions of years. Plants, forests, actual trees growing at the South Pole. We've found fossilized Nothofagus leaves in Antarctica, southern beech trees, not from millions of years ago, from the early Miocene 22 to 20 million years ago, on King George Island, at latitudes where nothing should grow. These were tundra-like forests, full ecosystems, in West Antarctica, long after the Ice Age supposedly started. But it gets more interesting. Evidence suggests Nothofagus-dominated ecosystems persisted at latitudes as high as 85 degrees south until the Pliocene. That's about 5 million years ago. That's nothing in geological terms. These trees were adapted to extreme conditions. They were survivors, and they prove that Antarctica had localized refugia, pockets of habitability, places where life could exist even as ice advanced and retreated around them. If trees could survive in these refugia, what else could? Animals, humans. We also found something in the Allen Hills. Ancient ice. Not just old ice. Ice that's 6 million years old, trapped in blue ice formations. And this ice contains air bubbles, atmospheric samples from 6 million years ago. The isotopic temperatures from this ice show that East Antarctica cooled by 12 degrees Celsius between 6 million years ago and the late Pleistocene. But here's the kicker. Some undated basal ice samples from the same area are 5 degrees warmer than the 6 million year old samples. 5 degrees warmer. Researchers think this ice represents surface snowpack or permafrost from the adolescent days of the Antarctic ice sheet. Days when things were warmer. Days when ice-free zones existed. Days when Antarctica looked very different than it does today. All of this points to the same conclusion. Antarctica's ice cover has been dynamic. It's advanced and retreated multiple times. It's created windows of habitability throughout recent geological history. And during one of those windows, during the mid-Holocene warm period, there was enough time, enough warmth, and enough exposed land for humans to establish a presence. Now I need to tell you about something that happened 12,000 years ago in Turkey, because it's going to blow your mind and make you realize what humans were capable of at a time when we supposedly were just primitive hunter-gatherers. Göbekli Tepe. It's an archaeological site in southeastern Turkey, discovered in the 1990s. And when they started digging, they found something that shouldn't exist. Massive stone pillars, T-shaped, 5 meters tall, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged in circular formations, covered in intricate carvings of animals, foxes, birds, snakes, scorpions, carved with sophisticated tools and artistic skill, with astronomical alignments built into the architecture. This site is 12,000 years old. Let that sink in. 12,000 years. That predates agriculture. That predates pottery. That predates metal tools. That's 6,000 years before Stonehenge. 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. This is the oldest known megalithic structure on Earth. And it was built by hunter-gatherers. According to mainstream archaeology, these were nomadic people, small tribes, living in temporary camps. No permanent settlements, no organized labor, no engineering knowledge. But Göbekli Tepe proves that's wrong, dead wrong. These people organized massive construction projects. They quarried multi-ton stones and transported them to the site. They carved detailed artwork into solid rock. They aligned structures to celestial events. They created something that required planning, coordination, specialized skills, and a social structure capable of feeding and housing hundreds of workers for years. Recent archaeoastronomical analysis found that 80% of the unexplained site alignments at Göbekli Tepe reference astronomical positions, either modern pole positions or previous pole positions according to alternative chronologies. The geometric precision is measurable. It's statistically significant. This wasn't random. This was intentional astronomical engineering. So if humans 12,000 years ago in Turkey could build Göbekli Tepe, why couldn't humans build something similar in Antarctica during a warm period? Why couldn't a coastal maritime civilization in Antarctica develop the same level of sophistication? The answer is they could. There's no technological barrier, no capability barrier. The only barrier is the ice that covered everything 1,700 years ago and hid it from view. Göbekli Tepe shows us that pre-agricultural societies were far more advanced than we thought, that they had knowledge, skills, and organization we didn't credit them with, that our timeline of human development is incomplete. And if we're that wrong about Turkey, what else are we wrong about? Let's talk about seafaring, because if there was a civilization in Antarctica, they had to get there somehow. And you might think that's impossible. Antarctica is surrounded by the most dangerous ocean on Earth. The Southern Ocean, freezing water, massive waves, icebergs. How could ancient people cross that? Except they did. We know they did because we have proof. During the last glacial maximum, 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, sea levels were 120 to 130 meters lower than today. Continental shelves were exposed. Land bridges connected islands. Coastlines extended far beyond where they are now. And humans lived on these coastlines. We found their settlements. The Waterfall Bluff site in Africa shows humans occupying coastal zones throughout the last glacial maximum and into the Holocene. They were exploiting marine resources, fishing, hunting seals and seabirds. They had sophisticated knowledge of coastal environments and seasonal patterns. Even more remarkably, paleoceanographic models show the North Pacific coast of North America had climatically favorable windows for coastal migration during the last glacial maximum, specifically at 24,000 to 22,000 years ago and 16,000 to 14,000 years ago. Seasonal sea ice created highways across otherwise impassable terrain. Marine mammals provided dense energy resources. People used these routes to migrate across continents. If humans could navigate icebound coastlines in the North Pacific, they could navigate icebound coastlines in the Southern Ocean. The skills are the same. The knowledge is the same. Reading ocean conditions, understanding currents, following marine animal migrations, building boats capable of handling cold water and ice. And we know ancient maritime people traveled farther than we ever imagined. Polynesians crossed the Pacific Ocean in outrigger canoes. Aboriginal Australians reached islands that required open ocean voyages 50,000 years ago. Phoenicians possibly circumnavigated Africa 3,000 years ago. Vikings reached North America 1,000 years ago. Humans have always been seafarers, always been explorers, always been capable of extraordinary voyages. So a maritime civilization reaching Antarctica during a warm period, that's not just possible, that's probable. Here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. If an advanced civilization existed in Antarctica during the Holocene, and we found evidence of it today, it would destroy the entire paradigm of human history. Not modify it, destroy it. Because everything we teach about the development of civilization is based on a specific timeline. Agriculture started in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago. Cities developed in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago. Writing appeared 5,000 years ago. Advanced technology came even later. That's the accepted model. That's what's in every textbook. That's what careers are built on. But if Antarctica had a civilization 7,000 years ago, during the mid-Holocene warm period. That means civilization developed independently in multiple locations. That means humans achieved complexity far earlier than we thought. That means the ice-free Antarctic coast was a viable environment for organized society. And that changes everything. It means we have to reconsider what humans were capable of. It means we have to re-examine other sites that don't fit the timeline. It means we have to admit that history is more complicated, more mysterious, and more ancient than we want to believe. This is why the evidence gets dismissed, not because it's weak, but because it's too strong, because accepting it means admitting we got fundamental things wrong, and institutions don't like being wrong. Academics don't like having their life's work invalidated. Governments don't like historical narratives being disrupted. So the evidence sits in journals, in reports, in datasets, available to anyone who looks, but nobody looks, or if they look, they explain it away. They find reasons to discount it. They protect the paradigm. Now we need to talk about what might have destroyed any Antarctic civilization, because even if they existed, even if they thrived during the warm period, something had to end them. And there's a candidate, a catastrophic event that happened 12,900 years ago. The Younger Dryas Impact. This is a hypothesis that's been controversial for years but keeps gaining evidence. The idea is that around 12,900 years ago, fragments of a disintegrating comet struck Earth. Multiple impacts, across continents, triggering massive biomass burning, stratospheric dust loading, a rapid return to Ice Age conditions. The evidence is accumulating. Platinum anomalies at the Younger Dryas boundary layer. These are platinum concentrations way higher than normal, found across multiple continents including Antarctica. Platinum comes from space, from extraterrestrial impacts. Nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that only form under extreme pressure and heat, found at the Younger Dryas boundary, consistent with impact formation. Quench-melted spherules, little beads of melted rock and minerals that cooled rapidly. These form during impact events when material is ejected, melted, and then rapidly cooled as it falls back to Earth. Widespread burn layers, charcoal and soot at the Younger Dryas boundary indicating massive wildfires across North America, Europe, and possibly other continents. The kind of fires you'd get from airbursts or impacts igniting forests. And the timing matches perfectly. The Younger Dryas was a sudden return to Ice Age conditions. Temperatures dropped, ice sheets advanced, sea levels changed. It was a climate catastrophe, and it happened within a human lifetime. One generation saw the world change completely. If there was a civilization in Antarctica or anywhere else, the Younger Dryas impact would have devastated them. The atmospheric effects alone would have been catastrophic. Impact winter, reduced sunlight, crop failures, ecosystem collapse, coastal flooding from ice sheet changes, and then the temperature drop, the return of the ice. A civilization living on the Antarctic coast during the warm period might have survived the impact itself, but they wouldn't have survived what came after. The climate shift, the rapid cooling, the ice advancing from the interior, the ocean freezing, the resources disappearing. Within a few generations, they would have been gone, buried under ice, erased from history, leaving nothing but the maps they created. The maps that somehow survived and got passed down through other civilizations until they appeared in medieval Europe. Let's get into some really weird stuff now, because beneath the ice, there are geological formations that don't make sense, anomalies that can't be easily explained, features that suggest something more complex than natural processes. The Wilkes Land Anomaly. It's a massive circular structure centered at 70 degrees south, 120 degrees east in East Antarctica, 510 kilometers in diameter. That's 317 miles across. Absolutely enormous. It shows up as a positive free air gravity anomaly. Basically, when you measure the gravity field over this area, there's a surplus of mass. But beneath that surface reading, there's a mass deficit. A negative gravity signature indicating less dense material beneath the surface than there should be. The modeling suggests a layer of sediment or breccia at least 5 kilometers thick. 5 kilometers. That's 3 miles of sediment. To put that in perspective, the Grand Canyon is only about 1.8 kilometers deep. This is almost 3 times that depth of accumulated material. The problem is that according to standard geological theory, Antarctica shouldn't have fluvial sediment accumulations that thick. It hasn't had the right hydrological conditions for long enough. The base of this sediment layer would lie 5 kilometers below sea level. That's a depth of erosion and deposition that's inconsistent with fluvial and glacial theory. So where did it come from? How did it accumulate? Some researchers think it's an ancient impact crater from a massive asteroid strike about 250 million years ago. But even that doesn't fully explain the sediment thickness. Unless Antarctica had massive river systems, active hydrology, flowing water, for far longer than we think. And there's evidence for that too. The Pensacola Pole Basin contains a subglacial depression 500 meters below sea level with a sedimentary succession 2 to 3 kilometers thick. This is interpreted as Devonian Permian sediments, ancient, but the thickness suggests prolonged deposition. Even more striking, there's evidence of a 1,500-kilometer transcontinental river system in West Antarctica during the Eocene. That's about 55 million years ago. But the point is Antarctica had massive rivers. Rivers that flowed off drainage divides. Rivers that infilled interior basins before the continent was fully glaciated. If these basins remained ice-free or were re-exposed during superinterglacials of the Pleistocene, they would have been prime locations for settlement. Protected valleys, water sources, access to resources, everything a civilization would need. I want you to imagine something. Close your eyes and picture this. You're standing on a rocky coast, Antarctic Peninsula. 7,000 years ago, it's summer. The sun actually feels warm, not hot, but warm enough that you've taken off your outer fur. You can hear the ocean, not crashing against ice, just water lapping against rocks, seals barking on the shore, seabirds calling overhead. Behind you there's a settlement, stone structures, partially underground for insulation, roofs made of seal skin and driftwood, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing, your children, your grandchildren, people fishing down at the water, others working on boats, preparing for a hunting expedition. This is home. This is what your people have known for generations. The coast has been ice-free for over 1,000 years, long enough that nobody alive remembers when it was different, long enough that this feels permanent. Your ancestors left stories about the ice, about colder times, but those are just stories, old tales. This is real life. Except things are changing, slowly at first. The summers aren't as long, the winters are colder. The ice you can see in the interior, the massive ice sheet that covers the continent's core, it's closer than it used to be. Your grandfather marked stones, reference points. Every year he'd go look. Every year the ice was closer. Now you do the same thing, and the ice is definitely advancing. Not fast, but steady, relentless, and there's nothing you can do about it. 10 years pass. Now the summers are short, really short. Just a few weeks when the ice melts at all. The rest of the year, everything's frozen. The ocean freezes over earlier each year, stays frozen longer. The seals don't come as often. The fish are harder to find. Resources are scarce. Your settlement is struggling. Some families have already left, tried to head north. Across the Southern Ocean to South America or Africa, desperate voyages in sealskin boats. You don't know if they made it. You probably never will. 20 years pass. Now the ice is right there, right at the edge of your settlement. You've abandoned the outer buildings, moved everyone to the inner core, huddled together for warmth. The ocean doesn't thaw anymore, not even in summer. The ice shelf is advancing offshore, grinding, groaning, making sounds like the earth is dying. Your grandmother, the old woman who remembered stories from her grandmother, she's telling the children about the warm times, about when you could walk without furs, about when the ocean was open, about when food was plentiful. The children don't believe her. They've never seen it. To them, the world has always been ice and cold and darkness. 30 years pass. Your settlement is buried. The ice came one winter and didn't leave. It piled up, drifted, covered the buildings. You tried to dig out, but more snow came, more ice. The people who were left, they died, froze, starved, or they fled south trying to find anywhere that was still habitable. You're one of the last. You're old now. Your joints ache from the cold. Your fingers don't work right anymore. Frostbite took some of them years ago. You're standing on ice, looking at where your village used to be, buried under meters of snow, everything you knew, everyone you loved, gone. And you realize something. Nobody will know you were here. Nobody will remember. The ice will cover everything. The ocean will freeze solid. The coast will disappear. And in a few generations, it will be like your people never existed at all. That's what the geological data suggests happened. A human-scale catastrophe. A climate shift that took just decades to completely erase habitable zones. The kind of event that would leave survivors scattered, traumatized, desperate to preserve some memory of what was lost. Maybe that's why the maps exist. Maybe the survivors made it out, made it to South America or Southern Africa or somewhere else, and they kept their maps, their knowledge, their memory of Antarctica before the ice, and they passed it down, generation after generation, until it appeared in medieval Europe as the Piri Reis map, as the Buech map, as fragments of impossible knowledge that nobody could explain. Here's the thing that's going to haunt you. Everything I've told you, all this evidence, all these possibilities, we're about to lose them. Forever. Because Antarctica is melting again. Right now. Faster than at any point in recorded history. The West Antarctic ice sheet is collapsing. The Thwaites Glacier, the so-called Doomsday Glacier, is losing mass at an accelerating rate. Ice shelves are breaking apart. Grounding lines are retreating. Warm ocean water is accessing deep cavities below the ice, creating the exact conditions that cause rapid ice sheet failure. The Dotson ice shelf showed anomalous under-ice structures when surveyed in 2024 by unmanned submarine. Terrace-like steps, teardrop-shaped pits, complex topography carved by basal melt, signs that the ice is unstable, signs that collapse is coming. And when it does, when the ice melts, what happens to anything preserved beneath it? Does it get exposed so we can study it? No, it gets destroyed, washed away by meltwater, crushed by collapsing ice, scattered into the ocean, buried in sediment flows. We have maybe 20 years, maybe 30, before the ice sheet configuration changes so dramatically that whatever evidence exists beneath it is gone, obliterated by the same warming that's exposing it. This is the cruel irony. Climate change is revealing Antarctica's secrets and destroying them at the same time. Ice that's been stable for 1,700 years is now flowing. Ice that preserved whatever was beneath it is now melting. And we don't have the technology or the funding or the political will to mount expeditions to find what's there before it's gone. Deep penetration radar surveys could locate anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar could identify artificial structures versus natural formations. We could drill targeted sites. We could use aerial surveys to map suspicious formations in newly exposed regions. But we're not doing it. Not systematically. Not with the urgency this requires. Instead, we're arguing about whether it's even worth looking, whether the hypothesis is credible, whether we should spend money investigating something that challenges the mainstream narrative. And while we argue, the evidence melts away. The clock is ticking. Every summer, more ice disappears. Every decade, more potential sites are destroyed. We're in a race against time, and we're losing. Let me tell you about one more thing that's going to blow your mind. Antarctica isn't just ice and rock. Beneath the ice, there's water. Lots of it. Over 400 subglacial lakes have been identified. The largest is Lake Vostok. It's enormous, 250 kilometers long, 50 kilometers wide, over 500 meters deep. It's been sealed beneath 4 kilometers of ice for potentially 15 million years. But it's not frozen. The water is liquid, kept warm by geothermal heat from below and insulated by the massive ice sheet above. The pressure and heat create a stable liquid environment even though the surface temperature is negative 55 degrees Celsius. And here's the wild part. These lakes are active. Satellite measurements from IceSat and CryoSat-2 show that over 124 of these lakes undergo cyclical fill-in drain events. They're connected by subglacial channels. Water flows between them, billions of gallons moving through a vast underground hydrological system. Operation Icebridge gravity measurements have created models of the bathymetry beneath floating ice shelves. They reveal deep subglacial troughs, channels carved into bedrock, pathways where warm ocean water can access the grounding line and accelerate melting from below. The Vanderford Glacier in Wilkes Land is currently retreating at an accelerating rate because modified circumpolar deep water is accessing deep cavities below the ice shelf, warm water, in contact with the base of the ice, creating the conditions for rapid collapse. Now think about what that means for preservation. If there are liquid water environments beneath the ice, they're not static. They're dynamic. Water flows, sediments move, but they're also protected, sealed away from the surface, creating potential time capsules where materials could be preserved in ways we don't fully understand. Microbial life exists in these subglacial lakes. We've confirmed that. Samples from Lake Whillans showed diverse microbial communities, bacteria and archaea surviving in total darkness, in freezing water, using chemical energy from rock-water interactions. If life can survive down there, what else might be preserved? Organic materials, wooden artifacts, leather, cloth. Things that would normally decay in other environments might last indefinitely in the cold, dark, sealed conditions of a subglacial lake. And if a structure from an ancient civilization happened to be located where a subglacial lake later formed, it could be submerged but preserved, protected by water and ice, waiting to be discovered. The suppressed theory. Now I need to tell you about Charles Hapgood, because his story is important. And it's been largely dismissed, but maybe it shouldn't be. Hapgood was a professor. He studied ancient maps. He became fascinated by the Peary Rise map and others like it, and he developed a theory, a controversial theory, one that could explain how Antarctica was mapped before the ice. Earth crustal displacement. The idea that the Earth's outer crust, the lithosphere, could slide over the mantle as a rigid shell, that the geographical poles could shift while the rotational axis stayed the same, that entire continents could move from temperate latitudes to polar regions relatively quickly. He argued that asymmetrical ice accumulation at the poles created centrifugal momentum, that this momentum could trigger a crustal shift, that Antarctica might have been located in a temperate latitude as recently as 11,600 years ago. And then a shift occurred, a 30-degree displacement, moving Antarctica into the polar zone, freezing it rapidly. This would explain the sudden preservation of mammoths in the Arctic. It would explain how Antarctica could have been warm enough for civilization and then frozen solid in a geological instant. It would explain the maps. Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book. Einstein, one of the greatest scientific minds in history. He said the theory had conceptual merit, that the physics were sound, that the accumulation of polar ice could indeed create the forces necessary for displacement. Later, Einstein questioned whether the mass of the ice alone was sufficient, and Hapgood's original mechanism has been largely disproven. The forces required are probably greater than ice accumulation alone could provide. Plate tectonics explains crustal movement better. But here's the thing. What if the mechanism is wrong but the observation is right? What if Antarctica did move from a temperate latitude to a polar one, but through a different process? What if gradual plate motion over millions of years created periods where Antarctica had ice-free regions that later became buried? Or what if there's something we don't understand about rapid geological processes? Something that could cause catastrophic crustal movements under specific conditions? Recent scholarship has proposed modified mechanisms, short-term geomagnetic field reversals that unlock the crust from the mantle, tidal forces from gravitational interactions, electromagnetic coupling between planetary and solar magnetic fields. These are still fringe theories, still dismissed by mainstream science. But geomagnetic reversals are real. They happen. The poles flip, and they're correlated with paleo-climate changes, particularly around the younger Dryas boundary 12,900 years ago. Ancient site alignments are real too. Multiple archaeoastronomical studies show that significant percentages of ancient sites globally display orientations towards solstices, equinoxes, and lunar standstills that can't be explained by references to the current North Pole. Some alignments match previous pole positions according to alternative chronologies. Is that proof of crustal displacement? No, but it's weird. It's anomalous. It suggests something about Earth's geological history that we don't fully understand. The paradigm breaking. Let's step back and look at what we actually know, not what we think we know, not what the textbooks say, what the evidence actually shows. 1. Antarctica experienced documented periods of reduced ice coverage during the Holocene. The grounding lines retreated 250 kilometers inland. The ice sheet thinned by 35 meters. This created coastal habitability windows. This is not speculation. This is measured geological data. 2. Ancient maps depict Antarctica without ice. Maps from 1513, 1531, and 1739 show coastlines, mountains, and features that match modern surveys of subglacial bedrock. The cartographers explicitly stated they were copying older source maps. This is not interpretation. These maps exist. 3. Advanced pre-agricultural societies existed. Göbekli Tepe proves that humans 12,000 years ago had sophisticated engineering, astronomical knowledge, and social organization. If they could build megalithic structures in Turkey, they could build similar structures elsewhere. This is not conjecture. We can visit Göbekli Tepe today. 4. Ancient humans were capable seafarers. They crossed oceans. They settled islands. They navigated ice-bound coastlines during the last glacial maximum. They had the skills and knowledge to reach Antarctica. This is not fantasy. The archaeological evidence of coastal migration is extensive. 5. Antarctica's subglacial environment preserves geological features in extraordinary detail. Magnetic anomalies, bedrock topography, paleo-drainage systems, all intact beneath kilometers of ice. If natural features are preserved, artificial features would be too. This is not wishful thinking. This is how preservation works. 6. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has accumulating evidence. Platinum anomalies, nanodiamonds, spherules, burn layers. A climate catastrophe 12,900 years ago that could have destroyed any existing civilization. This is not proven, but it's not dismissed either. The evidence exists. What does all of this add up to? Not proof, but plausibility. A plausible case that Antarctica was habitable during the mid-Holocene, that humans could have reached it, that they could have established settlements, that those settlements were buried when the ice returned, and that maps preserving knowledge of ice-free Antarctica somehow survived. Is that certain? No. Is there direct archaeological evidence? Not yet, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the potential evidence is buried beneath 2 miles of ice in one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. The question isn't whether we have proof. The question is whether we're willing to look. The cost of knowing. Let me tell you what it would take to actually find out, to definitively prove or disprove whether an ancient civilization existed in Antarctica. First, you'd need comprehensive high-resolution mapping, not just satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar surveys, aeromagnetic surveys, seismic profiling, covering the entire Antarctic coast and selected interior basins, looking specifically for artificial structures, sharp geometric forms, periodic spacing, material discontinuities, the kind of signatures that buildings and infrastructure would create. This would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, require years of field work, multiple research stations, specialized equipment, aircraft, ground vehicles, ships, support staff, all operating in the harshest environment on Earth. Second, you'd need targeted drilling. Once you identified anomalies, you'd have to drill down to them through kilometers of ice, extract cores, analyze them for materials that shouldn't be there, worked stone, metal, organic compounds associated with human activity, pollen from cultivated plants, charcoal from controlled fires. This would cost billions. Each deep drill site is a massive undertaking. The technology exists, but it's expensive and time-consuming, and you need multiple sites to establish patterns, to rule out natural explanations, to build a compelling case. Third, you need multidisciplinary analysis. Glaciologists, geologists, archaeologists, materials scientists, dating specialists, geochemists, all working together, integrating data from different sources, cross-referencing findings, building models, testing hypotheses. This would require institutional support, universities, government agencies, international collaboration, the kind of coordinated effort that usually only happens for things like particle physics experiments or space missions. And here's the problem. Nobody wants to fund it because the hypothesis is controversial, because it challenges established narratives, because if you're wrong, you wasted billions of dollars, and if you're right, you've just destroyed the entire foundation of accepted human history. So it doesn't get funded. It doesn't get investigated. The evidence stays buried. The mystery remains unsolved. And every year, climate change makes it less likely we'll ever know the truth. The maps as messages. Let me come back to those maps, because I think there's something profound about them that we're missing. Imagine you're part of a civilization that's dying. The ice is advancing. Your people are scattered. Most are dead. The ones who survive are refugees, desperate, traumatized, trying to preserve something of what was lost. You have maps, detailed maps, maps that show the world as it was before the ice, before the catastrophe, maps that represent generations of knowledge, generations of exploration, surveying, astronomical observation, cartographic skill. These maps are precious. They're the only record that your civilization existed, that your people mapped continents, crossed oceans, understood the world in ways that won't be matched for thousands of years. So you protect them, you copy them, you pass them down from father to son, from master to apprentice, from library to library, through civilizations that rise and fall, through dark ages and renaissances, through wars and disasters. And slowly, over millennia, pieces of these maps appear in other cultures: Egyptian maps, Phoenician maps, Greek maps, maps that Ptolemy compiled, maps that Arab scholars preserved, maps that medieval Europeans found in ancient libraries. Nobody knows where they came from originally. Nobody remembers the civilization that made them, but the maps persist, fragments of impossible knowledge, showing a world that shouldn't be knowable. Until finally, in 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis compiles 20 source maps into a single chart, And at the bottom of that chart, there's Antarctica, drawn by people who saw it before the ice. The maps are messages, messages in bottles, sent forward through time by a civilization that knew it would be forgotten, hoping that someday someone would see them and understand, would realize that the world beneath the ice was not empty, that people lived there, that they knew things we've forgotten. We are that someone. We're the ones receiving the message, thousands of years late, but we're finally starting to understand. The future of discovery. So what happens now? What's next? We're at a critical moment. Technology is advancing rapidly. We have better radar, better satellites, better imaging, better dating methods, better analytical tools. We're developing AI that can recognize patterns in geological data, machine learning algorithms that can distinguish artificial structures from natural formations. Within the next 20 years, we could have comprehensive maps of everything beneath Antarctic ice. Every valley, every mountain, every basin, every anomaly. We could identify candidate sites for investigation. We could prioritize targets based on probability of finding evidence. We could use autonomous drones, submarines, robots that can operate in subglacial environments, that can collect samples, take images, map structures, all without requiring humans to physically access the sites. We could analyze ice cores for microscopic traces, DNA, pollen, chemical signatures, materials that indicate human presence even if we can't reach the sites themselves. The technology is almost there. The capability is almost there. What we need is will, political will, institutional will, financial will, the recognition that this question matters, that understanding our history matters, that knowing whether we're alone in achieving civilization matters. Because if we find evidence of an Antarctic civilization, it changes everything. It means humans are more resilient than we thought, more capable, more ancient. It means civilization isn't fragile. It can develop in harsh environments. It can survive catastrophes. It can leave traces that last for thousands of years. And it means we're not the first. We're not the pinnacle. We're part of a longer story, a story of humans pushing boundaries, exploring, adapting, building, and sometimes failing, sometimes being erased by forces beyond their control. That's a humbling realization, but it's also inspiring, because if they could do it, if they could build something lasting in one of the harshest places on Earth, then we can too. We can face our own challenges, our own climate catastrophes, our own uncertain futures. The warning we're IGNORING. There's one more thing I need to say, one more angle to all of this that's going to keep you up at night. What if the Antarctic civilization didn't just get erased by natural climate change? What if they saw it coming? What if they had warnings? What if they tried to tell others? The maps suggest they had sophisticated knowledge. Astronomical alignments suggest they were watching the sky. If the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is correct, they might have seen the comet coming. They might have known disaster was imminent. Did they try to warn other civilizations? Did they send out expeditions, messages? Did they try to preserve their knowledge not just for themselves but for whoever came after? And here's the terrifying part. If they did warn others, nobody listened. Or if they did listen, they didn't do anything about it, and the civilization was destroyed anyway. We're in a similar situation now. We have warnings. Climate scientists are telling us the ice is melting, that sea levels are rising, that coastlines will be submerged, that millions of people will be displaced, that ecosystems will collapse. We have the maps, the data, the evidence, just like they might have had warnings about the comet, about the climate shift, about the ice returning. And we're doing what people always do with warnings. We're arguing about them, dismissing them, finding reasons to doubt them, protecting the status quo, refusing to make difficult changes. The Antarctic civilization, if it existed, is a warning, not just about the past, about the future, about what happens when climate shifts rapidly, when ice advances or retreats, when the environment we depend on changes faster than we can adapt. They couldn't stop the ice, but maybe they tried to leave us a message, through the maps, through whatever evidence is buried beneath the ice, a message that says, "This happened to us, don't let it happen to you." And we're not listening, we're not looking, we're not learning. So here's where we are. Antarctica was habitable during the mid-Holocene. The geological evidence is clear. The ice sheet collapsed, land was exposed, temperatures were warmer. This created a window of opportunity, a window that lasted thousands of years. Ancient humans were capable of reaching Antarctica. They were sophisticated navigators. They had maritime technology. They established coastal settlements in harsh environments. There's no reason they couldn't have done the same in Antarctica. Ancient maps show Antarctica without ice, multiple maps from different time periods, with accurate details that match subglacial topography. These maps had source material, old source material, material that suggests someone mapped Antarctica before the ice. Advanced civilizations existed earlier than we think. Göbekli Tepe proves this. Pre-agricultural societies had engineering skills, astronomical knowledge, and social organization. The timeline of human development is wrong. We achieved complexity earlier. A catastrophic event occurred 12,900 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact. Evidence is accumulating. This event could have destroyed any Antarctic civilization, triggered climate changes, brought back the ice, erased the settlements. And now climate change is destroying the evidence. Right now, as I'm talking to you, the ice is melting. The preservation environment is being destroyed. We have maybe 20 years to find what's there, 20 years before it's gone forever. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This isn't about ancient aliens or mysticism or pseudoscience. This is about evidence, real, measurable, published evidence from credible researchers. Evidence that suggests the world beneath the ice was not empty, that people were there, that they built something, that they left traces, that we're running out of time to find them. The question is whether we care enough to look. If this changed how you see history, hit subscribe. More mysteries coming next week.